Hi, dear listeners. Welcome to this new episode of my podcast, A Digital Tomorrow. I'm joined by Tony Moroney today. Tony is a very important person in this whole realm of digital transformation, fintech, metaverse, AI. So I leave it to Tony to introduce himself and talk about his background and anything else he wants to share.
Well, thank you, Oriel. You're setting me up there, but no, actually, I have been involved in digital disruption, digital transformation for the last 10, 15 years. It's an area that is of particular interest to me. So my involvement is both on the advisory side and on the education side. So I work with clients, boards, and C-suite around the world in terms of helping them to understand strategy, and in that context, the role of digital transformation. But I also run the digital programs for the Irish Management Institute, which is executive education, where we're helping executives to come to terms with, well, what actually do we mean by digital transformation, and how do you affect digital transformation? Because as you well know, most digital transformations have failed. So it's important that we start to change that dynamic. Apart from that, I am involved in thought leadership. So I'm involved in a think tank with Cork University Business School called the Digital Transformation Lab, where we talk to interesting people all around the world about what they're doing in digital transformation, or books they have written about.
Mhm. I see. Well, thank you for sharing. And I know you are a very well-known voice now in all these areas. You are always like in the top 10, 25, 30 thinkers now by many organizations in the areas such as digital transformation, AI, metaverse. So I would like to start talking about digital transformation precisely because I mean, we all hear everyone, many companies talking about digital transformation, saying that they want to become, well, to transform towards digitalization. But I mean, what does it actually mean, digital transformation? I mean, what's the meaning of that?
Well, that's a great question. And one of the things I do, Oriel, when I'm with boards or executives teams, or even when I'm doing executive education, I often ask the question, well, what is digital transformation? And if there's 10 executives in the room, I'll get 25 answers. And that's part of the problem, because organizations claim to be doing digital transformation, but yet they haven't defined what they mean by digital transformation. And if you're doing something and you're not quite sure what it is you're doing, it's not really that surprising that most digital transformations don't work. Now, for me, look, digital transformation, the biggest problem is the word digital, because really what we're talking about is transformation. Because we never transform because of technology. We transform because we want to be competitive and relevant into the future. Now, we may use digital technologies as part of that process, but they're a means to an end as opposed to an end in themselves. And I think what happens in organizations is they hear the word digital and they don't hear the word transformation. So now they start focusing on digital implementation of technology, right? And the problem is, if all you do is change some of the technology, you actually haven't really changed anything, because you've now put in a digital technology into an analog organization where the mindset is still analog. It's not thinking, end to end in terms of what are we trying to do for our customers and what type of experiences are we trying to create, and do we have a real understanding of what our customers are going to expect today, tomorrow, and into the future? Because if we can't deliver what our customers expect, right, we start to become irrelevant, and that's when companies fail, because someone else will step into the breach and they will give them the experience or the service or whatever it is they're looking for. So I think most organizations, they really need to stand back and sort of, park digital for a moment and sort of say, look, if we think about the world in 3, 5 years time, what does that say about what we need to be able to do to be able to meet our customers' needs? And if we work back from that, we then start to ask, well, how do we get there? And in the how do we get there, you actually will address questions around, well, what technologies might support us? But we never start with the technology. We start with what we're trying to do in the business to make sure that we will be relevant and competitive in the future.
Mhm. I think this approach makes perfect sense to me. Uh, but I mean, I know it's a broad question, but how would you say that digital transformation can actually benefit companies? I'm asking this because, for example, when the blockchain hype started a few years ago, everyone wanted to do blockchain related stuff. Any company wanted to jump into blockchain, for example, even though in certain cases there was no use case for them to do so. So
Mm.
looking at this from the digital transformation angle, like in which cases do you think digital transformation will actually benefit companies?
So look, I think it's a very interesting point you made, because if we look back over the last 3-4 years, we had blockchain, then we had metaverse, and now we've generative AI, and next year we might have quantum computing. So the whole thing that we need to put into context is, look, there's always going to be disruption. And technology is a big disruptor, but there's other disruptors as well. There's economic, there's social, there's all sort of disruptions. COVID was a disruption, so there's always going to be some sort of disruptive factor. And what organizations need to actually excel in is understanding how to work their way through disruption, not get focused on the specific. Oh, it's a blockchain, or it's a metaverse, or it's a generative AI. What they need to realize is that, look, when we start out, so if you start out as a new business, you're really clear on your market, you understand your customers, you know what problems you're trying to solve. Right? But as organizations get bigger, they become siloed, because you need to have experts in this area and this area and this over here. And then they start to become very siloed and disconnected from the market. Now they're starting to run into the problem where actually they don't really know what their customers want. And the mistake that's often made is they start to digitize things they are doing, which are not necessarily what customers want anyway, right? But it's what the organization is used to doing, right? So I would say to every organization is, look, this is about being close to your customer. It's about making sure that your business model is relevant to your customers, so that your customers want to deal with you as opposed to someone else. Because if we do business in a particular way and the world moves on, and we continue to do what we've always done, even if we digitize it, and I'm going to come back to that point, we've moved a long way away from what customers want. So look, when I think back through COVID, there was all these headlines around 60 months of digital transformation in 5 months and all that sort of stuff. And the answer is actually there wasn't. Right? There might have been a lot of digital technology sales in 5 months. Right? So Zoom licenses, Teams licenses, all that sort of stuff, laptops. But that's not digital transformation, because if you think about it, people suddenly were working from home, but did their job change? No. All they were doing was doing their work from a different location. That's not digital transformation. And I think one of the problems, Oriel, is that when people talk about digital transformation, you hear digitization, digitalization, digital transformation, innovation, all those terms being used interchangeably. And while they're all related, they're not the same things. Right? So for me, digitization is, if you take what you're doing in an analog world and you just make it digital, that's digitization. That's not, that's great. You should be doing that anyway, right? Digitalization is where you're sort of, using, digital tools and technologies to create new value. So, I always use the example of, Uber used to bring people, from A to B, and then they start bringing food from A to B, and now they're doing medicines A to B, right? So they're just exploiting the technology. But digital transformation is around strategically repositioning your organization for the future. And the way I often describe this is, look, organizations, they're great at anchoring themselves in the past. And look, the past is important, because we need to understand where we came from. We need to understand the values of the organization and all those type of things. But that's hindsight, right? So it's relevant in terms of how we got to where we are. Organizations also look at, well, what's happening in the world today? And I would call that insight. So everyone knows that generative AI has arrived and people are trying to do different things. But that doesn't give you any competitive advantage, because we all know that, right? Every organization knows that. The real challenge is, the organizations that can create foresight, where they're looking out the horizon, sort of saying, well, actually, I think the world is going to look like this in 3 or 4 years' time. And with that foresight, they're bringing that back to today to figure out how to transform. Now, that is digital transformation, because what we're doing is we're making sure the organization is fit for purpose into the future. And it's not actually about the technology. It's around, what are we trying to do for our customers in the future, and how do we get there? And I think that's the piece that's missing. And what happens in organizations, they get fixated on blockchain or metaverse or whatever. And it's all about just technology implementation. But they're forgetting that actually at the end of the day, when people in an organization hear the executive talk about digital transformation, the first thing that goes through their mind after the meeting is, will I have a job? Right? So we're all human. right? If you hear the organization talking about, well, we're going to do digital transformation, we're going to put in these blockchain technologies or whatever it might be, you're immediately sort of going, well, actually, I wonder what does that mean for me and my department and my teammates, etc. So the real challenge has to be creating this vision for the future, showing everyone in the organization why it matters to our customers and to our stakeholders, but also why it matters to them. And in that context, we need to be able to say to them, you have a future. And in that future, we're going to give you new skills. And you will actually be able to contribute to the vision that we have for the business. And even if you decide to leave, you're going to leave with new skills that you don't have today. And that's the big disconnect, because organizations, they tend to look at digital transformation as a project, specifically a technology project, as opposed to an organization-wide change, which changes mindset to change culture, to change the business. And the reason that's important is because if we don't think differently about the business, we will keep doing what we've always done. And therefore the culture won't change, and therefore the organization won't change. But if we start thinking about the business and we start saying, well, what if, or could we, and you start looking at, where we could take the business, and you bring your people with you. And I think that's another important point in that, look, if I look at the average age of a board or an executive team, they're not digital natives in the main, right? But the organization is full of digital natives. And I think, the idea, the historical idea that, the people at the top had the most experience, that's kind of gone, right? Because, you might have 30 years experience, but it might be irrelevant in the context of where the world has moved to, right? But what you do need to make sure is that with that 30 years of experience, you actually are going to turn that into, how do I orchestrate getting the answers to come up through the organization, and to tap into all these digital natives that we have working for us, to sort of say, well, how would you think we could go about this? Or is there a better way that we could look at this? Because I suspect in a lot of cases, they're looking at the organization thinking, this is very old and antiquated. And that's not going to excite them, and it's not going to encourage them to stay. So I think we need to tap into the resources in the organization, which will help the executive, but it will also groom the young digital natives in terms of, future roles in the organization. So we've a long way to go. I don't think organizations are very joined up in their thinking. I think it's yeah, I give you a laugh. So I go into an organization and I say, so who's responsible for digital transformation? And they say, oh, that's Oriel. And I say, okay, so does Oriel have the budget and mandate to change the organization? And they say, no, but he's working on these projects. I say, oh, so he's not responsible for digital transformation. And there's a fundamental difference, because organizations like to say we're doing digital transformation, and then they appoint someone, right? And that person has no support or no budget or no mandate, and they're set up to fail. And that needs to change, because it needs to be led from the top, but it needs to happen from the bottom. Right? Because the top don't have to have all the answers, and in most cases don't have all the answers, but they have the wherewithal to set the vision and to bring people on the journey with them. And that's what they need to focus on, not the technology per se. Focus on, where do we need to bring this business so that we are relevant tomorrow and into the future.
And I know you mentioned some right now, but based on your experience as an advisor, what would you say are the most common mistakes that companies make when trying to become like digitally transformed, right? To proceed with digital transformation.
So I would say that the number one mistake is the executive team are not joined up. So, and look, if I'm an executive, let's say you and I are both executives in a business, and you're very keen on digital transformation and I'm not, I can kill it by doing absolutely nothing. I don't need to say a bad word about it. I just never mention it. And everyone in my part of the organization, right, they say, well, it doesn't matter to Tony. Like, why does he say that? Well, he never talks about it. It's not in our goals. It's not in our metrics. It's not in our performance plan. It's not on anything. Therefore, it's not important. Right? So I think, the CEO and the leadership team need to be joined at the hip, because organizations are brilliant at understanding any chinks in the armor. So if they spot that actually this doesn't matter to Tony, but it does matter to Oriel, but actually Oriel doesn't set my goals or pay my bonuses, so I know what I'm doing to do. That's a big problem. But the other thing is, they're not thinking about this as a culture change, right? Because it's a bit like you can impose technology on a firm, But I've been in loads of organizations where the technology is sitting there and no one uses it because no one embraced it. No one ever wanted it in the first place. No one was even consulted in terms of how would this help you deliver for the customers. It was just imposed onto them and they bypassed it. I mean, one organization I worked with last year, they had what I would call the spreadsheet culture. So they had spent a lot of money on, CRM systems and whatnot, but everyone bypassed them and, they ran the business, their part of the business on spreadsheets. So, I think you need to sort of, look at this as a holistic transformation that starts with mindset and culture, that has a shared vision of where we're trying to get to. You need to build in, some early wins, because look, no board or executive team is going to wait 3 years to find out if it's working. And so you need to build into it, some early wins, and that builds confidence, and it also builds commitment. And so if people are saying, "Wow, actually that worked, and we're now doing this piece," and they can see a path to improvements, and their life is better, the customer's life is better, now you're starting to get commitment. So I think, look, if you just, and I see it happen all the time, add an executive, one executive maybe sponsors a technology implementation, and the rest of the organization is kind of, it's like the organ transplant, right? They're hoping for the best, that the body will accept the new organ. Invariably, it doesn't.
I see. Yeah, I think that's a fair comparison, and I agree with you when it comes to the idea of change. Change is very important, and in some cases it's not just about the C-suite team, for example, deciding to implement a certain digital transformation policy. It's also about people's mindset, right? For them to be willing to accept and embrace this change, which is not always easy in every case.
Yeah, and look, there's two other points I'd make. One is that, look, quite often organizations, they set out to do digital transformation, but they never change the metrics. So they work on the old metrics, which sends a message in itself, right? So if you don't change the metrics, you're not serious, right? People are looking at this and sort of saying, well, but our metrics are still the same. The agenda is still the same. So what's this thing about digital transformation over here? And it loses impetus, and that's not good. You can't have that.
Yeah, great. And I'd like to talk now about something very related to digital transformation, which is precisely the technology behind this transformation. I wanted to ask you, what are the current tech or even fintech trends that you find most exciting or interesting nowadays?
Well, look, everyone is talking about generative AI, and look, it is quite exciting in terms of, if you want to write a poem and all those kind of things, brilliant. If you want to create an image, it is absolutely fantastic. I think what we're seeing, and here's my honest view, is I think, we certainly get all the hype. So we get the hype about the metaverse, then we get the hype about generative AI, and there's people hyping up quantum computing as the next thing, and all that sort of stuff. I genuinely think we're moving into a world where actually it's a confluence of different technologies starting to come together. So, simple example, people say, "Oh, the metaverse is gone now, it's all generative AI." And I said, well, no, I don't think that's quite true, because I think the metaverse is here already. I mean, you got 3.3 billion gamers who, as far as they're concerned, they've already been in the metaverse for years. But what you have now with generative AI technologies is the ability to actually create virtual worlds instantaneously, any world you want. So I think what we're seeing is, there's a lot happening in generative AI. There's a lot happening in terms of immersive technologies. Apple have decided to call it spatial computing. That's fine. They can go. I think actually that's one of the interesting things is the metaverse may not be called the metaverse. We may not use that term at all, but it's just going to be about the immersive internet, right? And how we will experience it. We're going to see, the connectivity speeds continue to. I was down in Barcelona for MWC, and talking about 5.5G, 10 gigabytes of download speed, right? So if you want to run digital twins, do remote surgeries, all these type of things, the connectivity is going to be there. So I think, Oriel, what we're seeing is that there's a whole range of technologies that are slowly converging together, and that's where the real opportunities are going to come about. Now, if you're a startup business, a startup, it's brilliant, because you can sort of say, well, actually, we want to disrupt the market, and how do we create new experiences or better value for customers? And you can look at how these technologies can help you. I think for incumbent organizations, it's a real challenge, though, because, firstly, they got a lot of legacy issues, right? Sort of legacy technology, legacy mindset, right? Legacy technologies, which don't necessarily communicate or talk to each other. And they also have more to lose, right? So they're going to be more cautious, right? Because, look, if I've no customers and I come out with a great idea, well, that's fantastic. But if I have loads of customers and I come out with a great idea and it goes wrong, right? That might be a real problem. And I think one of the struggles for organizations is that, so we take generative AI, right? So it is fantastic if you want to think about marketing and creativity and content and all that sort of stuff, right? But if it's going to answer, serious questions for customers, particularly in regulated environments, and it gets it wrong, now you have a real problem, right? Now, I also think there's an issue in terms of, a lot of organizations, from what I have seen, don't have, clear policies, ethical policies for, responsible use of technology, etc. Now, why is this important? Because let's say you're running some sort of, retail business or whatever, and you have a rogue employee. They may negatively impact, 30, 40 customers before you find out. But it's contained. You can deal with those 30, 40 customers and make sure that they're sorted out, etc. But if something goes wrong in this world that we're talking about in the future, where, technology is actually automatically driving a lot of the business, you might find that actually all of your customers have been impacted and you didn't actually know until maybe 9 months later. Now you've got a real problem, right? So I think for organizations, the challenge has to be, right, there are some really interesting technologies that could help us deliver on our vision, right? We're not interested in technologies for the sake of technologies, but actually these technologies could help us get to where we want to get to. But we need to be clear on how they work, and in particular, what outcomes they will drive, right? Because, I can see a situation in 2-3 years' time where there are executives and board directors, having to explain to the world that they didn't realize the algorithms did that. Right? And that's not a good place to be. So you're better off actually dealing with these things up front. Now, one of the things I think which is, interesting and scary, right, is the reason generative AI has taken off so quickly is because anyone with access to the internet can use it, right? So you don't need a headset or anything like that. If you have access to the internet, you can try generative AI tools. So the question I have in my mind is, okay, so how many employees are using generative AI tools in their workplace without their employer's knowledge? And it would be naive to think that, if someone is dealing with a problem or an issue, that they wouldn't be tempted to sort of, well, I'll just go into my phone and check it out in ChatGPT and see what answers it gives me. Right? So, I would say for every organization, they need to be, at a very minimum, no customer information, no company information, unless published, printed on the web page as the annual accounts. Nothing can go into any learning model, right? Period. Right? And that's not a big policy, but everyone should have it. And most organizations so far have not. So I think, look, there's loads of technologies, but as I've said from the outset, this is not about the technology. This is about what are we trying to do in our business, and how do we create new value for our organization and our customers. Now, I think some of the technologies can absolutely help in that. If we take artificial intelligence, so artificial intelligence is not new. It's been around for longer than me, and I wasn't born yesterday, right? But generative AI has, certainly caught the attention since November 22, right? A lot of the headlines in the newspapers about, AI is going to take people's jobs, and I'd have mixed views on that. I think it will take some jobs, but it will actually create new jobs as well, right? But the real issue is, of course, we can use these tools to create productivity gains, but that's kind of table stakes. Everyone will do that. So I'm not going to get competitive advantage by, using tools to create productivity, because all my competitors are going to do that as well. Right? The real trick is, how do we use these tools and technologies to help us create new value consistent with our vision for where we want to bring the organization. And I think that's going to be a slower burn because it's new, there's risks involved, there's a whole, plethora of organization and technology issues that will also slow it down.
Among all these things that you mentioned now, I wanted to emphasize two maybe. First of all, when you said before that, or the reason why sometimes startups can innovate more than incumbents, I think it makes perfect sense, right? I mean, I think there is this idea of having perhaps less to lose. If you're a very big bank, then of course you may try to jump into, let's say, tokenization or AI, but there is always this higher element of risk because you have much more to lose than, let's say, a new created startup with only 3 employees. So of course, I think this is one of the reasons why startups can afford to be maybe more innovative. And then I like very much as well this idea of confluence of different technologies, which is something that I tried to explain as well. I was talking in a panel the other day, and I remember there were like different questions about AI, then blockchain as different entities. But what I said in that panel was that even though those are different technologies, of course, at the end of the day, whenever we talk about, let's say, tokenization, blockchain, generative AI, open banking, even though we may be talking about different things, at the end of the day, I think the future will be to see most of them intertwined. And I think that that's the idea, what you said as well.
Yeah, no, and I absolutely believe that will happen. And look, we can already see it happening. I mean, look, generative AI and virtual reality powered by 5G, that didn't happen 3 years ago because it wasn't possible. Right? It's happening now. And I see that, as the technologies evolve, and if we look back through history, we'll see that, someone came up with a great idea and it went so far. And then someone else said, actually, you know what, if we did this to it, it would be even better. And then someone else said, well, what about this? And what you find is, disruption goes in different directions and people pick out something and say, that's really interesting. I could do that with this. Right? And that's where the innovation will come about. And I think, look, it's, if you think about technology in isolation, unless you're a technology firm, it's very limiting. Right? You need to think about, the business and what we're trying to do. Now, one of the interesting things, just on your point, look, in the second industrial revolution, which was electricity, organizations had heads of electricity. Now, unless you're a Bitcoin firm, I don't think you have a head of electricity anymore, right? But isn't it interesting that organizations have heads of digital products, heads of digital channels, heads of digital distribution, etc., right? And you kind of say, well, why have we got heads of digital anything? Because surely we just have a business and we have customers, and some of them will want to deal with us, in digital channels, and some will want traditional channels, some will want hybrid. Why are we creating this new silo in the organization called digital, right? Because surely digital should permeate everything, right? So it doesn't mean everything we do is digital, but everything, has digital permeating through it. And I think that's a fundamental flaw in thinking. And, I look at banks in particular, and they always have heads of digital channels, but they used to have heads of call centers too, etc. So, but really, where I think we need to get is, why haven't we just got heads of customers? And we're focused on what is the customer trying to do and how do we deliver that for them in a way that makes us hyper relevant and super competitive. And the customers love us and they want to do more with us. That's what we want, right? Not that we actually, we did X through the digital channel and Y through the call center and Z through the branch. Who cares?
Yeah, I guess following what you said now, that we'll fully embrace digital transformation the day when we have like a head of this or that area, but without having to say head of digital this or that, right? I mean, that's the day where digital transformation will be maybe like fully embraced by organizations.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Oriel. When we're not talking about digital, we know we will have got there, right? Because we don't talk about electricity in the business. We don't walk into the business and say, how are we doing on electricity today, guys? Right? It's just taken for granted. When we get to a stage where actually we don't talk about digital anymore, right? We're just talking about customers and the experiences we're creating for customers, and how we need to continue to evolve the business to make sure that we continue to meet those customers' needs in the future. That's when it will have happened. Not when we're talking about, well, we got digital initiatives and we got digital sales and digital products. Yeah, all that does is create tension in the organization, because there's a finite amount of resources, be it people, capital, whatever. So now you have the digital business looking for resources and the traditional business looking for resources, and it's a fight, right? Forget about all that. Let's talk about our customers and what we're doing for our customers. And is it a fantastic experience that we're giving our customers? Right? Because if we're doing that, well, then we needn't worry about the technology or anything else, because our customers will come back to us.
I agree. No, and that creates what you said before, that those kind of internal struggles in certain companies that I've seen as well, whereby you see, for example, the head of digital something always fighting with those not so much digital oriented to get more digitalization, whereas the others think it's useless, and it creates this friction that it should actually be, as you said, unnecessary, because everything should be digital, or everything should be focused towards making everything better for the customer and for everyone.
Yeah, and look, sometimes I hear organizations saying, "Oh, our digital strategy," and I say, "Is that for a different organization?" And they're looking at me and they say, "Well, what do you mean by that?" I said, "Well, surely you have a strategy, and your strategy has a digital perspective. Why would you have a separate strategy called a digital strategy? Right? Because that suggests you're going somewhere different, right? So you need to make sure we have one strategy, and digital it's embodied in it." And to your point, well, actually, yeah, it's just part and parcel of what we do. It's not something separate, right? So, bit like electricity, we don't think about electricity, right? But it happens, right? Digital the same.
Yeah, it should maybe like breathing, right? I mean, we all breathe, but we don't realize we are breathing. I mean, we realize that, but we are not doing this like thinking
Yeah,
thoroughly we are. I mean, if we want to go and run a marathon, we are aware that we're going to do that. But when it comes to breathing, I mean, it's something that we do without noticing. So I think digitalization should pretty much be the same. Companies should make a strategy, of course, but they shouldn't be differentiating, as you said, whether this strategy is digital or not digital, because at the end of the day, it will involve both digital and non-digital elements.
absolutely. And if it's rooted in the customer, we're now actually solving problems for the customer, right? And somewhere we will use digital tools and technologies to help us solve the problem. But actually, we're solving the problem for the customer, right? And in that process, creating a great experience, which will have the customer come back to do more. Right? So I think you're right. So autonomic, I think, is the word that I've heard used, where it just happens. You don't even think about it. Right? And I think, unfortunately, it's still that thing over there that we need to do, right? As opposed to actually let's change our mindset, where it's just part and parcel of who we are and what we do.
I fully agree. And well, unfortunately, we are reaching the end of our time, Tony. I mean, we could keep talking about this for hours, because I know you're a big expert in all these topics, and we could, as I said, talk for many hours. But I hope my listeners got to learn a bit from you about these areas in this very short half hour. For me, at least, it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you and to learn from you. So thank you very much, Tony.
My pleasure, Ariel. Thank you for the invitation.
Looking forward to hosting you again in the future. I follow everything you post on LinkedIn, which is very interesting, all the reports, all your thoughts. So I encourage my followers, my listeners, to follow you as well, in case they are not doing so yet.
Thank you.
I think they will learn a lot from you, as I said. So thanks again, Tony, for your time. And well, to all my listeners, thank you very much for listening to this episode. Feel free to follow me and to follow Tony and to listen to the next episodes as well. Thank you very much, and see you soon.